I work the graveyard shift at a small gas station on the edge of town. It's the kind of job that people pass through on their way to something better. But for now, it's all I've got. Nights are usually uneventful. Just a handful of customers buying cigarettes or snacks, and the occasional trucker stopping for gas. But one night, something happened that I can't forget. It was a Wednesday, sometime around 2 a.m. The station was dead quiet. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead, and the only sound was the hum of the refrigerators in the back. I was leaning against the counter, scrolling through my phone to keep myself awake when the landline rang. The shrill sound startled me. Nobody ever called the station that late, so I assumed it was a wrong number. I picked up the receiver and said,
"Thanks for calling. How can I help you?"
There was silence on the other end.
"Hello?"
I repeated, feeling a little uneasy. Then a voice, raspy and slow, whispered,
"Are you alone?"
My stomach dropped. I forced a laugh.
"Yeah, it's just me. Who's this?"
The voice chuckled, a low, sinister sound that made my skin crawl.
"I know,"
it said before the line went dead. I stood there, gripping the receiver, my heart pounding. I tried to tell myself it was just a prank, kids messing around, bored out of their minds. But something about the voice felt off. It wasn't playful, it was calculated. I hung up and walked to the front door to make sure it was locked. The glass doors reflected the empty parking lot outside, lit dimly by the flickering neon sign. Everything looked normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I went back behind the counter, trying to focus on my phone, but every small noise made me jump. A creak in the ceiling, the hum of the ice machine. My own breathing felt too loud. Then I noticed something outside. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. Out past the edge of the parking lot, where the light faded into darkness, I saw movement. A figure stood just beyond the glow of the neon sign. They weren't moving, just standing there, barely visible in the shadows. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead.
"It's just a customer,"
I told myself. They'll come inside any second, but they didn't. They just stood there, watching. I picked up the phone and dialed the police. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped the receiver. "Police department. What's your emergency?" I tried to keep my voice steady. "There's someone outside my gas station, standing in the parking lot. They've been there for a while, and they're not moving." The dispatcher asked a few questions and assured me they'd send an officer to check it out. It would take about 15 minutes, she said. I hung up and looked back at the parking lot. The figure was gone. My heart was racing as I scanned the lot, but there was no sign of anyone. I tried to convince myself they'd just left, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they were still out there, watching. Suddenly, there was a loud bang on the back door. I nearly jumped out of my skin. The door led to the storage room, which was supposed to be locked. My mind raced. Could it be the same person? Grabbing the only weapon I had, a rusty tire iron from under the counter, I made my way to the back. My footsteps felt deafening against the tile floor. When I reached the door, I could see through the small wire mesh window. It was too dark to make anything out. Another bang, louder this time. I almost dropped the tire iron.
"Who's there?"
I shouted, my voice cracking. No answer. I held my breath and peered through the window again. That's when I saw it. A pale face pressed against the glass, grinning at me. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering in my chest. When I looked again, the face was gone. The sound of sirens broke the silence, and a wave of relief washed over me. The police pulled into the parking lot, their lights flashing. I ran out to meet them, stammering out what had happened. They searched the area but didn't find anyone. The back door was still locked, and there were no signs of forced entry. The officer on duty tried to reassure me, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. That was my last night working the graveyard shift. I couldn't shake the memory of that face or the voice on the phone. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear that raspy voice in my head, whispering,
Are you alone?
My name is Sarah, and I work as a night security guard in a corporate office building downtown. It's not the most exciting job, but it pays the bills. The building is tall, sleek, and always eerily quiet at night. Most of my shift is spent walking through empty hallways, checking locks, and monitoring the security cameras. But one night, something happened that I still can't explain. It started like any other shift. I clocked in at 10 p.m., grabbed a coffee from the break room, and settled in at the security desk. The cameras showed the usual, a deserted lobby, the cat hallways, and the occasional cleaning crew member pushing a cart. Around 2 a.m., the cleaning staff left, and the building became truly silent. That's when I noticed something strange on the camera feed. The monitor for the elevators showed that one of them was moving. It was rising slowly, floor by floor, even though no one else was in the building. I stared at the screen, confused. It stopped at the 7th floor and stayed there. I radioed up to the 7th floor to check if anyone had come back or if a cleaner had forgotten something. No response.
Probably a glitch,
I muttered to myself, but I couldn't shake the unease creeping over me. Deciding to check it out, I grabbed my flashlight and headed to the elevator. The doors opened as soon as I pressed the button, and the car was empty. The stale smell inside didn't help my nerves. I stepped in and pressed the button for the 7th floor. As the elevator ascended, I could hear faint creaks and groans from the old machinery. I told myself it was just normal wear and tear, but something about the sound felt wrong. The elevator stopped at the 7th floor with a soft ding. The doors slid open, revealing a dimly lit hallway. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness as I stepped out, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The 7th floor was empty, just like the cameras had shown. The offices were dark, the doors locked. But then, at the end of a hallway, I noticed something, the faint sound of a woman crying.
Flo.
I called out, my voice trembling.
Is someone there?
The crying stopped abruptly. My stomach churned, but I forced myself to move toward the sound. As I reached the last office, I noticed the door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open slowly, shining my flashlight into the room. It was empty, just a desk, a chair, and some filing cabinets. Then I saw it. On the desk was a photograph. It was old, black and white, showing a group of office workers smiling in front of the building. But one of the faces had been scratched out violently, leaving deep grooves in the paper. I felt a chill run down my spine. Suddenly, the door behind me slammed shut with a force that rattled the walls. I spun around, my flashlight trembling in my hand.
Who's there?
I shouted, trying to sound braver than I felt. No response. I yanked the door open and bolted for the elevator. As I reached it, the lights in the hallway flickered and went out completely. I was plunged into darkness, except for the weak beam of my flashlight. The elevator doors opened and I stumbled inside, slamming the ground floor button. The doors closed and the elevator began its descent. But then, it stopped. The lights inside the car flickered. Then the elevator came to a halt between floors. I hit the emergency button, but nothing happened. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating. And then, I wasn't alone. The faint crying started again, this time right behind me. My heart felt like it would explode as I turned slowly. In the dim light of the flickering bulb, I saw her. A woman stood in the corner of the elevator, her face pale and gaunt, her eyes hollow. Her mouth moved silently, as if she were speaking, but no words came out. She reached out a bony hand toward me, her fingers unnaturally long. I screamed and backed into the corner, desperately pressing every button on the panel. The elevator jerked. The lights went out, and for a moment, I was in total darkness. When the lights flickered back on, she was gone. The elevator began moving again, descending slowly. When the doors opened to the lobby, I ran out, gasping for air. I quit that job the next morning. I later learned that a woman had died in the building years ago. An office worker who had been trapped in the elevator during a power outage. They said she suffocated before anyone could reach her. Now, every time I hear an elevator ding, I wonder if she's still looking for a way out. My name is Alex, and I work as a night supervisor at a large shipping warehouse. It's a lonely job, but the pay is good, and the quiet nights let me catch up on podcasts or read a book during my breaks. The warehouse itself is massive, a maze of towering shelves filled with plates and crates. At night, the place feels like a ghost town, with only the hum of machinery and the occasional creak of settling steel to break the silence. One night, something happened I'll never forget. It was around 2 a.m., and the graveyard shift was running smoothly. The forklift operators had finished their tasks for the night and clocked out early, leaving me as the only person in the building. I did my usual rounds, walking through the aisles and double-checking inventory. That's when I noticed it. In one of the aisles, a pallet of boxes had been knocked over. The boxes lay scattered across the floor, and the air felt wrong. It wasn't just the mess that caught my attention. It was the silence. The hum of machinery seemed distant, muffled, as if the warehouse itself were holding its breath. I grabbed my radio and called the control room.
Hey, did anyone report an accident before leaving?
Static.
Control room, do you copy?
I tried again, but there was no response. I chalked it up to a dead battery and decided to clean up the mess myself. As I picked up the boxes, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see someone or something standing there. But the aisle was empty. After cleaning up, I continued my rounds. The warehouse felt darker than usual, as if the overhead lights were struggling to cut through the shadows. In one corner of the building, near the loading docks, a faint sound caught my attention. It was a low, shuffling noise, like footsteps dragging across the concrete floor.
Hello.
I called out, my voice echoing through the cavernous space. No answer. I followed the sound, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. As I turned a corner, I frowned. At the far end of the loading dock, a figure stood in the shadows. It was tall and unnaturally thin, its silhouette blending into the darkness. It didn't move, but I could feel its gaze fixed on me, cold and unrelenting.
Who are you?
I demanded, trying to sound authoritative. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it tilted its head, as if curious, and took a slow, deliberate step forward. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by fear. The figure stepped closer, and as it did, I saw it more clearly. Its body was inhumanly elongated, its limbs too long, its fingers impossibly thin. But it was its face, or lack of one, that truly terrified me. It was featureless, a blank void where eyes, a nose, and a mouth should have been. I stumbled back, nearly dropping my flashlight.
Stay back,
I shouted, my voice cracking. The figure stopped, tilting its head again, almost mocking me. Then, in an instant, it vanished. One moment it was there, and the next, it was gone. I stood there, trembling, my mind racing to make sense of what I had just seen. But before I could collect myself, the warehouse lights flickered and went out, plunging the entire building into darkness. Panic set in as I fumbled for my flashlight. When I finally turned it on, the beam barely seemed to penetrate the oppressive blackness. And then the noises started. A faint scratching sound echoed from somewhere above me, followed by the distant clang of metal. It was as if the entire warehouse had come alive, filled with invisible things moving in the shadows. I ran. I didn't care where I was going. I just needed to get out. My footsteps echoed loudly as I sprinted through the aisles, the flashlight bouncing wildly in my hand. It was standing there, waiting for me. This time, it was closer, its blank face inches from mine. I screamed and swung the flashlight, but it passed through the figure as if it were made of smoke. I turned and ran in the opposite direction, not stopping until I reached the main exit. My hand shook as I fumbled with the key card, and when the door finally opened, I burst outside into the cold night air. I didn't stop running until I was in my car, locking the doors and speeding away. The next morning, I tried to report the incident to my manager, but they dismissed it as stress or an overactive imagination. They even showed me the security footage hours of me walking through the warehouse alone. No shadowy figure, no knocked over boxes, nothing. But I know what I saw. I quit that job a week later, and I haven't set foot in a warehouse since. Whatever was in there with me that night, it wasn't human, and I have no intention of ever meeting it again.